I think that what we're doing now is, in a sense, creating our own successors. We have seen the first crude beginnings of artificial intelligence. It doesn't really exist yet at any level because our most complex computers are still morons, high-speed morons, but still morons. Nevertheless, some of them are capable of learning, and we will one day be able to design systems that can go on improving themselves, so that at that stage we have the possibility of machines which can outpace their creators and therefore become more intelligent than us.
Artificial intelligence, a machine beyond the mind of man. It's science fiction, but is it also fact? Chess, for centuries a test of the human intellect. But these men are merely observers. In August 1977, 16 computer programs competed against each other in the Second World Computer Chess Championship.
Bishop takes rook, and black queen starts checking down here. Eventually, possibly picks up this pawn check.
The best programs here can defeat 95% of all serious human players.
The crowd tonight is absolutely phenomenal. I've never seen a crowd like this before at a computer chess tournament, and there's certainly about twice as many people here as ever go to watch the US Open Championship or the United States Closed Championship, even when Fischer was playing. I think that probably most of you are having a good laugh tonight and you're here out of curiosity, but in a few years' time you'll be here because these programs are playing better than the Masters and Grandmasters in the US Championship.
The favorite, Northwestern University's Chess 4.6, is playing a program from Bell Labs.
We have a move. Rook to king, rook 7.
Linked by telephone to a computer in Minneapolis, Chess 4.6 quickly examines a vast number of possible moves.
Okay. Mate and 2.
The style of play is distinctly not human.
Okay, we have a move. Rook to rook 3.
Rather than the judgment, intuition, and insight characteristic of human champions, speed is the secret of success.
Okay.
Let's move.
Mate and 1. We have a move. King to rook 1. Knight to bishop 7, mate.
And chess 4.6 has just given mate.
Will computers ever think like people? It is a question that goes beyond chess.
A central fact about computers is that computers are prodigious calculators. They can solve huge systems of differential equations, invert very large matrices, and other such mathematical things. In my view, there's an enormous difference between judgment and calculation. It is that gap, the difference between judgment and calculations, that computers can't cross.
From the beginning of science, there have always been people telling you that this or that boundary line is a sacred one and can never be crossed. That it would never be possible, for example, for scientists to simulate or synthesize the basis of life. Not very long ago, the first complete gene was synthesized in the laboratory. This vitalist attitude of uncrossable frontiers is behind the question of whether there are human mental abilities which could never be simulated. I personally see no more reason now to be discouraged by this vaguely expressed feeling than scientists have been in the past.
It is a computer scientist, Joe Weizenbaum, who is now the most outspoken critic of artificial intelligence. His own program, called Doctor, gave rise to his first doubts. The program parodies a psychiatric interview. The patient, here Weizenbaum, types in a complaint, and the program, in the role of psychiatrist, responds. The program became a plaything at MIT. People told it the most intimate personal details, as if they believed the program could understand. But in fact, the program doesn't understand anything.
Well, I would deny that there's any important sense, non-negligible sense, in which the program understands. It certainly creates the illusion of understanding. There's no question about that. But we have to understand that illusion is an attribution that the person conversing with the program contributes to the conversation. It's not a function of the program itself.
The program simply detects key phrases and makes routine transformations, such as turning the word I into you. When it doesn't recognize anything, it responds automatically, "Please go on." Weizenbaum was shocked when people began to confide in the program, acting as if it really were a psychiatrist. But it was when colleagues began to suggest that programs like Doctor could be used as substitutes for human psychiatrists in treating real patients that disillusion set in.
There can be no question that the responses that I noticed with respect to the Doctor program, particularly the idea that this could be the dawn of automatic psychiatry, that machines could perform psychiatry at all, and so on, that these awoke in me questions that applied more generally to artificial intelligence than merely to these kinds of conversational programs.
Is the computer just a calculator, or is it capable of judgment? Is it only a number cruncher, or can it match the human mind? Like us, the computer has a memory where its knowledge is stored. Its tiny circuits hold billions of pieces of information. The circuits understand only one thing, the presence or absence of electrical signals. That means all information must be put in on-off terms. So the memory or knowledge base is like a maze of lights, some on, some off. Like the dots and dashes of Morse code, the arrangement of the lights can represent numbers, letters, even words. This particular knowledge base contains information about television programs. It shows, for example, that Sesame Street is an educational series for children. Like an index, it defines relationships among the separate pieces of information. It is by means of a computer program that the knowledge can be used. Written as a series of simple steps, the program can retrieve facts and answer questions about the information in the knowledge base. It does this by issuing instructions to the part of the computer that performs calculations, to the circuits which move pieces of information around and compare them. These are simple, basic operations, and the program combines them in the most effective way. As an example, we ask it if there are any science documentaries on television. The question is translated into the machine's on-off code, then matched against the knowledge base. Step by step, the program directs the search for an answer. Step 1, it scans the category list. It locates documentary, which reveals more than one documentary program as a possible solution. Step 2, it looks for science. And a match is made. Nova is the only program with arrows linking it to both documentary and science. Step 3, it writes the answer. Even with a knowledge base 1,000,000 times larger, in reality this process would have taken a fraction of a second. It is undeniably mechanical. But proponents of artificial intelligence argue that the fundamental processes of human brain cells are just as mechanical. As with a computer, it is their combination, the program, that counts. In matters of memory and calculation, machines easily outpace the mind. But that's only a small part of human intelligence.
The results of the first few experiments in artificial intelligence surprised everyone because it turned out that relatively small programs were able to do things that everybody had thought would require a lot more intelligence. For example, some of the early programs were able to play a fairly good game of chess
or to solve pretty hard problems in college calculus. Well, everybody knows that those things require very advanced intelligence. But it was much harder to get the programs to answer simple questions in ordinary language, the kinds of things that any child can do to solve simple, everyday, common sense problems.
We take common sense for granted, but there is knowledge and understanding behind even the simplest activity. Artificial intelligence is based on the faith that there are rules underlying every aspect of human life. Rules which can be uncovered, turned into programs, and given to machines. But do such rules really exist?
That's the interesting question. Why don't we just tell the computer everything that there is to say about our everyday form of life? It's because our everyday form of life is so pervasive and so much something that we embody, not something that we know, that there wouldn't be any way of telling it. It's not a bunch of facts, any more than somebody who knows how to swim knows the rules for swimming. We don't know the rules for being a human being or the rules for how to move and stand up. We just embody those rules. Yeats said something very relevant to this. He said that we can embody the truth, but we cannot know it. We'd have to know it to be able to tell a computer what it was to be a human being.
Well, the only difference between us and those critics is that they think it is impossible and you can't understand it, and we think that you possibly can.
What makes up common sense intelligence? One important aspect is certainly language. Stanford University's Terry Winograd wrote a program to converse in everyday English.
This is a program that I wrote in order to experiment with language understanding by computer. What I wanted is a world which the computer could talk about, so that while it was understanding sentences, it would actually be doing something with what was being said. You can see there's a set of objects, some simple toy blocks and pyramids and a box and a kind of a hand that can move them around. Let me give it a simple command. I can type, pick up a big red block, and the sentence appears, you can see, and it analyzes what it is that I'm asking, and then plans a sequence of commands to carry it out.
The program has no intrinsic knowledge about the blocks world, so Terry Winograd has filled its knowledge base with facts about the objects it contains, their properties, and their relationships to each other. It's by correctly carrying out his commands that the program proves it understands English. But even in this limited world, the process of understanding a command is no simple matter.
When I type a command like this, it has to go through several different phases of analysis. First, it needs to look up the words in a dictionary it has and figure out the structure of the sentence, the kinds of things you learn in grammar school, the subject, the verb, and the object. Then needs to analyze the meaning of that sentence in this context, which involves converting from the specific words to a set of concepts that it has about the blocks world, what the objects are, what you can do with them, what the colors are, and so on, so that it can then use that to construct a program for carrying out the action. And finally, there has to be a kind of a reasoning system which reasons about the actions in order to know what has to be done to actually carry them out. In that first one, for example, it couldn't just go pick up the big red block, it needed to clear it off first. And there's a whole set of programs which deal with what you need to do in order to manipulate objects in this kind of a simple world.
In addition to knowing the rules of the blocks world, the program has to master the rules of language, which are not always so clear-cut.
The program really isn't focused on the moving of these blocks. It's basically concerned with the ways in which people use language to communicate. So if, for example, I type a command like grasp the pyramid, even though that makes sense in terms of the basic ideas of what's in the blocks world, in this context it doesn't, because there are three different pyramids there on the screen, and I wouldn't use a phrase like the pyramid unless I had a particular one in mind. So the computer answers, I don't understand which pyramid you mean. since it has no way, in this context, of knowing which of those three I intended. I can give it a much more complicated command, like find the block which is taller than the one you are holding, and put it into the box. In this case, it needs to do a whole set of things, one of which is figure out what is meant by words like one and it. We use those in normal everyday language in a way which has to be interpreted by looking at the context in which they appear. In this case, it types back out, by it, I assume you mean a block which is taller than the one I am holding, which is only one of several possible things I could have meant, and it needed to use a set of rules of thumb about how people use words like that in order to decide, in this case, which one I intended.
As skillful as it is in handling the imprecision and ambiguity of English, if you talk to Terry Winograd's program about anything but blocks, it would be incapable of responding. So language cannot be understood in a vacuum. Like us, a computer must know what it's talking about.
By trying to program a computer to use language, we're forced into looking in a very clear way at what it is that people do when they use language in those same ways. We're forced to make very explicit things which seem so natural that people who don't look at language in this way don't even think they need explaining. And one of the things that we've learned from writing programs like this is the complexity of the way people understand language, the kinds of connections there are between using your knowledge about what's being talked about and your knowledge of language. The fact that you can't study language in a kind of separated, isolated way in which you look at grammar and dictionary meanings and content, but that really needs to be integrated into a much more coherent kind of theory.
If language and knowledge of the world cannot be separated, how do children acquire language?
I would like cheeseburger and a Coke.
One theory is that even before they learn to talk, children accumulate a detailed knowledge of routine experiences called a script.
Everything he says.
Later, they draw on these scripts as a basis for language and conversation. Observing the children at Yale University is Roger Schenck, who contends that computers can learn to communicate in much the same way. He writes computer programs that can understand stories like this one. It's simple even for a child, but surprisingly difficult for a computer.
Well, the main problem is that our computers don't have knowledge. They can do certain manipulations, but they don't know things. And if you want to tell a story to somebody and talk about something to somebody, if they don't have the same knowledge that you have, they can't understand what you're talking about. So essentially, it's like an expert talking to somebody very naive. He wouldn't be able to communicate very much. So what we have in this computer program is the problem of giving it knowledge. All right. So if we want to tell it stories about what goes on in a restaurant, well, it better know about restaurants and what they're for and what goes on in them, so it can sort of fill in the blanks of what I didn't say. If people had to say every single piece of information that ever happened, that little three-line story about restaurants would take hundreds and hundreds of lines, because there are assumptions that we share, because as humans, having been in restaurants, know about what goes on in them.
Schenck believes that the programmer can compensate for the computer's lack of experience by spelling out exactly what goes on in a given situation. In other words, by providing the computer with a script, in this case for a restaurant.
A script is in fact, knowledge about the world. It is an attempt to codify the kind of knowledge that humans have about situations in a precise form such that we can give it to a machine. You can't just say restaurants and tell it about restaurants in some very vague fashion. We have to give it an explicit list, essentially, of this happens in a restaurant, and then this, and then this, and then this. So, for example, what we have here is a restaurant script, and it has, at the beginning, some preconditions, which says that the person who's eating has to have some money and has to be hungry in order for him to go into it. And then he enters, and it has an entering scene. The entering scene says he goes to the restaurant, he enters the restaurant, he looks around, he sees if he can go to a table, he goes to the table, and he sits down. This is followed by a scene where the waiter gives him a menu, and the customer reads the menu. And this enables ordering, where the customer tells the waiter what he wants. This enables the cook to prepare the meal, and eventually the waiter will give the meal to the person who has ordered it. He will then eat it. He will then get a check and go give them some money to the management and leave the restaurant.
The program analyzes the restaurant story and fits it into the script. The stars show that the first sentence, John went to a restaurant, has been matched. The program then works on the second sentence of the story, he ordered lobster, until it too is matched. But it's the final sentence that holds the key to this simple story.
The last sentence is, he paid the check and left. And by that I mean, they'll say, okay, he paid the check and he left, and that's the end of my restaurant script. So everything in the middle must have happened. And so it goes back and traces between ordered, the last place where we saw the stars, particularly told about, and the new part, which is the paying money to the management and leaving, which is where the stars are now. And it says, oh, well, what must have happened is the cook must have prepared this lobster, and he must have given it to the waiter, and the waiter must have given it to the person, and the person must have decided to eat it, and then the person must have eaten it. And so our program essentially is capable of making all those inferences, and in this case has made all those inferences, because it understood the important facts that surrounded the main event.
But in the story, the main event was never really stated. The program was told only that John ordered lobster. But what did he eat? Shank asked the program.
And the program says, lobster. No, we didn't say that, actually. And the story never specifically said anything about eating at all. But the program has no trouble with it any more than a person would have trouble with it, because it has, in fact, understood the story.
I think we have to be clear about the fact that language understanding involves very, very much more than the mere comprehension of a string of words. Silences, for example, are very, very important.
If people are understanding what is meant by emotional kinds of statements, or pauses, or metaphors, or whatever these AI critics think is so difficult, I'd like to understand how they explain that people can understand them. People have to have some method of doing it.
Even the most ordinary linguistic intercourse among people involves shared experiences. And the fundamental difficulty with computer understanding of language is that there are human experiences, uniquely human experiences, which the computer, by its very nature, in virtue of its structure, in virtue of the difference between its structure and the biological structure and needs and so on of human beings, can simply not share. Communication involves sharing.
Well, but shared experience, you could make the same argument that a computer couldn't understand anything about a restaurant because it's never been in a restaurant. I think that whatever the shared experience is, you have some rule for accessing it. If you have a rule that says, well, I remember feeling that when I was in love, then I felt this way, well, I can write that, and then I did this, I can write that same rule into a computer program. Whenever you see something about love, you can assume that the person talking might feel this way and might do this. It's just a question of understanding what people think they know and think they are understanding in a situation.
Forward. Forward.
If, as Shank believes, man and machine will have something to talk about, how will they actually converse? Michael Condon is paralyzed from the neck down.
Fast.
At NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, he is testing a wheelchair that can understand human speech.
Train. Out.
Aided by Larry Tews, he first
In.
trains the device to recognize his
Raise.
voice.
Lower. Turn.
A mini-computer
Wait.
matches his particular speech patterns
Back.
to a set of 35 commands.
Tilt. Right turn. Left turn. End.
Okay, it looks like it's trained all right now. Why don't we see if we can work with the cup?
Close.
Mounted on the wheelchair is an arm which can manipulate objects within a range
Clamp.
of several feet.
Clamp. Raise. Clamp. Up. Left. Left. Halt.
Better go slow now.
Flex. Flex. Up. Halt. Raise. Raise. Halt. Right.
This is
Left.
one of the first practical applications in which an intelligent computer can imitate and even replace human
Turn.
functions.
Back. Halt.
In 1986, this vehicle is to make its way through the barren landscape of Mars. As the representative of Earthbound explorers, the rover embodies another aspect of common sense intelligence, the coordination of mobility and vision. It has a laser rangefinder and 2 television cameras. They detect a rock, shown in pink, and its shadow in red. The rover has been told to cross the room. Its computer plots a path to get there which avoids the obstacles. Observed by NASA scientist Bob Cunningham, the rover moves. On Mars, it will cover 20 miles a day to collect samples of rock and soil.